take it away.
All right. So if you guys have questions, unmute yourself. You know, don't wait to the end. Just ask as we go along. This is kind of like a you know, we're sitting around the table talking. So this is for you. So don't hesitate to, you know, no question is a dumb question. Just jump right in. So business plan. This really starts, you know, when you find a deal and you're underwriting it and you're looking to figure out what are the most feasible ways to maximize income and the most feasible ways to minimize expenses. Now you could say, oh, I'm gonna just cut payroll, but it's got to make sense. It's got to work for that property. When Kyle and I have looked at properties many times, we definitely see way too much um, uh, overhead, salaries for a property. You know, you got to figure around 80 to 100 per employee. And we've looked at properties, you know, 176 units, and they've got like three maintenance people and two leasing agents and a manager of the property, and that's really, it should be like 2 and 2. So different property management companies run their business in different ways, and the ownership too, how they direct their property management company has an effect. And a lot of owners, you know, they buy the property and they fall asleep at the wheel. I'm really surprised how often that happens. And I know Rachel knows that Kyle and I are like, you know, we you know, there's Kyle brings out his tape measure for if a blade of grass is out of line, you know, he could see it from like a mile away. I'm just kidding, but we're very, there's a fine line between micromanaging and really making sure every single thing on your property is running the way you like it. It's your, if you're a GP, a sponsor, an owner, it's your property. It should be run the way you want it to be. So you've got to be hands-on. But that being said, you know, that's formulated at your business plan level, and you're not the only one working on that. Because if you're working on a silo and not working with your property management company, your regional manager, they might tell you that it doesn't work, and you need their expertise. You need their you know, they're the ones that are boots on the ground. They're the one that works with, you know, whether it's 20 properties or 200 properties. They're the experts in what they do, and you need to rely on their expertise as well. But you need to get everyone on board when you're working on that business plan from when you're underwriting it. So get your team involved. So you know, you're going to formulate your business plan, and when you get theirs, you're going to go over that as well, and you're going to keep massaging it. It's just because you come up with that business plan and you're underwriting, it doesn't stop there. It continues throughout the whole process, and you need to make sure you bring everyone back to the table and review that business plan. We do that before we take over a property, when we take over a property, and continually throughout. It just doesn't end from the very beginning, because you've got to be proactive and not reactive. And what I mean by that is, if you're not checking your data, if you're not checking, you know, if you don't have KPI set up, you're not going to see what's down the road. If you're not getting enough leads, maybe you're at 95% occupied, but you're getting very few leads. Your occupancy is going to drop off. So you got to make sure you're having your advertising set up correctly. You're measuring every piece of that. You've got to be proactive, and I'll get into this a little bit during leasing, but on your renewals, you know, you've got to be 3 months out in advance. There's lots of ways that you need to be proactive so that you don't get behind. And so when something like COVID hits, if you're not ahead of the game, you're in big trouble. And luckily for Kyle and I and our properties, you know, we were well capitalized. We were on top of our game. It doesn't mean we didn't have setbacks. I mean, for one of our properties, we we've been finding a little bit more crime, delinquency, but compared to other properties, we're doing fine. It's just we had just bought that property at the end of November and hadn't gotten some of the bad residents out yet, and we've had to live with them and work with them, and manage through many months of COVID. But you have, like I said, you've got to be proactive on how you deal with that. And measure and track results. So we use RealPage. So RealPage connects to Yardi, which is the software that our property management company uses, and we built out a whole bunch of KPIs so we can measure all sorts of things over a period of time, which is great. Rent per square foot. So you want to see that rent per square foot continually increase, and that's based on renewals, on new leases. You want to see renewals increase, and that's something one of our properties kind of struggled with in the beginning on having enough renewals. But being able to track all your results, you're able to see that. If you're just kind of looking at some data on a month-to-month basis and not looking at it over time, it's really hard to see if you're improving or not. And everything that you're measuring gets managed. So it's that KPIs are so important to instill. All right, next. Anyone have any questions with the business plan? And the last thing I want to mention is being able to pivot. Just because you have a one business plan doesn't mean you don't change that. And on our East 3434 property that Rachel manages, we didn't plan to do a paint job in the beginning. We thought our new signage package, our interiors will do the trick, but we ended up spending $80,000 more on painting because we felt, after talking with the whole team, that it would produce the rents that we wanted to get and even more. So we did pivot there, but we were able to do that because we were well capitalized. We had buffers in budgeting. It wasn't, we don't budget if we got an estimate for 70,000, we wouldn't just put 70,000, maybe we put 75, 80,000. We allowed for a little overage if anything changes, because costs go up over time. And if you're waiting, if you get a bid and you're doing the work 3 months later, it might change. So you got to have those buffers. You've got to have that conservative underwriting so that you can execute. All right.
All right. So the difference between budgeting and underwriting, I think I can get pushback from some people on this, but I really do think that they're different from one another. For me, underwriting is your initial pass of the property, the financials, and your initial business plan. But budgeting has to do with a deeper dive where you're looking into things year over year and really thinking about your business plan as it evolves year over year. So you're essentially peeling back the layers of an onion and really getting in there. I think a lot of people, when they're underwriting, they just create a budget by having a certain percentage increase year over year. And so what I mean by that is if the taxes, tax is a bad example. If the payroll, for example, is $190,000, they're just going to do a standard 3% increase across the board for the next 5 years. But what if your business plan is actually to vacate the property and then lease it up? Well, then you may need more actual payroll in year 2 than versus year 1. And on the other side of that, maybe you want to stabilize the property over the first 18 months, but then once it's stabilized, you may not need as much payroll. So what Gary and I do when we're underwriting, we do that initial first pass, but really when we get into the budgeting phase, which is, before we even close on the property, we lay out our 5 years and we say, okay, in years 2 or 3, is there anything different that we're doing that's either going to create more payroll? Because certainly you can have situations where you'll have higher expenses, or will you have lower expenses because of things like water conservation? So if you're going to do a water conservation program, you're going to have low flow toilets. maybe some type of valve that's going to reduce the water usage, things like that, then maybe your bills come down in that second year. I will say that we've learned to make sure that you don't plan for all of that savings because you just never know what's going to happen. Example, COVID, because everyone's staying home, actually a lot of our utility costs have gone through the roof because everyone's staying home. They're using more water, they're using more electricity. And so on a master metered property, you're going to have to take the hit on that. And so at one of our properties, we do pay for the water. It is individually metered, but we still pay for the water. So our water costs and sewer costs have gone through the roof for the last 12 months, and it's been really tough to control. So that's what I mean by thinking out your business plan, is always look at where your business plan as it evolves in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, and work with your property management company. Like Gary said earlier, they really are your partner in this. And, you know, I don't know that we always do a great job, Rachel, but we always do the best we can to make sure that we relay that this is a partnership and we want to work together on getting the best product out there. You can't micromanage it to a point where the property management does not have a say, but you also have to work tightly with them to make sure the right decisions are being made. So don't make the mistake of just underwriting. You've got to budget year over year over year. And that even comes to the income lines too. If you're going to introduce a new income stream, whether it be package lockers, parking, covered parking, charging extra for rubs, whatever it is, those things are not all going to happen in year one, right? So there's going to have to be a slow implementation of that. And you need to be careful of introducing too many things at once. We talk a lot about our Phoenix property. One of the things what we're doing there is we are raising the rents. We have introduced what's called Conservice, which is a bill back program for our rubs. We also want to introduce the USPS lockers, but we've decided to hold off on the lockers right now because we don't want to have too many things added up at once to where people and renewals are seeing, you know, $200 or $300 increases versus maybe $50 to $100. So you're going to see that you need to plan for that in year one, maybe a little bit, year two, a little bit more, and year three, a little bit stabilized, right? So really important to know the difference between underwriting and budgeting. Next item on there for budgets and financials, CapEx and reserves. Robbie?
Yeah, we got a question actually
Oh
from
yeah,
Harry.
go for it. Let's
So
see.
he says, but how do you budget or forecast things like COVID, where suddenly most tenants will stay at home, thus using more utilities?
You can't. So maybe that was a bad example, but it was an example of how things can just pop up. So my point on that one is to be careful on how much you think you're going to save, because you never know what's going to happen. But that's why it's important to budget and forecast conservatively and try and think ahead, right? If you're just thinking year one and then we'll do a standard 3% increase, you're not really thinking about your business plan. In my opinion, it's laziness and a lack of planning. And so thinking out all 5 years, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about a COVID. You're not going to find every situation. But the more in depth you are, you know, in golf, I always say this: aim small, miss small. So the more you focus on things, the better the outcome's going to be. And someone mentioned have enough reserves. Definitely having enough reserves helps. Although it doesn't, you know, reflect on the P&L, it is good to have money in the bank, certainly. And that's kind of to my next point, CapEx and reserves here. So I always get asked, like, what is the right percentage or what is a dollar number per unit for CapEx and reserves? And unfortunately, there is no one set number in my opinion, because it all happens to do with what your business plan is going to be and where you're investing in, right? But everything Gary and I talk about is Arizona markets. But if you're going into a property and you're going to fix 100% of the current deferred maintenance, which is really a lot of what Gary and I focus on, is knocking out that deferred maintenance, which essentially brings down your day-to-day expenses and takes a lot of pressure off your maintenance so that they can focus on things other than deferred maintenance. But if you're going to fix 100% of your deferred maintenance, you're going to need less in your CapEx and reserves than if you're only going to do some of the items, right? So there's no one item. It's kind of a fluid working process. And based on one decision, you're going to have more or less CapEx or reserves. But some of the reserves that we always plan for are HVAC repairs. We always repair or reserve about a third of the units being replaced in our CapEx reserves. We always do a 10 to 20% contingency on everything, on all the CapEx combined. And then we'll also have additional reserves as well based on the condition of the property. Again, going back to looking 5 years out, properties are only getting older, right? And I know there's a lot of people that invest in 1970s, 1980s product. Well, that's 40 and 50 years old. So even if you were to fix all the deferred maintenance in the first couple of months, you're still going to have more deferred maintenance in the next coming years, right? Whether that be the parking lot needs to be done again, certain roofs need to be fixed again or re-slurried, retextured, maybe the pool furniture needs updating. There's all sorts of different things. And so just because you are going to fix deferred maintenance, you've got to plan for down the road too. And so that ties into really budgeting. Always look a few years ahead on where that's going to be. Now, the lender's also going to have a say in that and help you out. They'll have their own list, which they call an immediate repair list. And then they'll also have their replacement reserves, and they calculate the replacement reserves based on the amount of work they feel that the property is going to need in the next 5 or 10 years. But don't rely on just what the lender is going to have on there as well. You need to understand what your business plan is, because the lender actually doesn't really care about your full business plan. They're really caring about how much money is in reserves to fix a property. So that is what I have for that one. Understanding your financial statements. This is a big one. You know, we buy $1 million businesses. That's what we do here. Apartments is the business, but essentially they're $1 million businesses. And so if you don't have experience running businesses or reviewing financial statements, they can be confusing and overwhelming. I think I have a pretty good grasp on them, and I still don't understand a lot of the stuff. And I'm saying that because Rachel's here, so I have to be honest here with it. I still struggle with the accruals and how things are booked on the general ledger and on the balance sheet and things like that. But we have a good grasp now, and we work with our property management company to come down with a system, and they help educate us on that piece so that we understand where the money's going. But if you don't understand how and where the money is flowing, you know, certain things can be put on the balance sheet and not applied to your cash flow statement or T12 that you're later going to have to deal with, and you're just not going to know about it. And COVID's a great situation. Bad debt has been stacking up over the last 12 months from people not paying. And what we do is we take the bad debt every month and put it towards our balance sheet to offset the accounts receivable. And so we are not going to see this huge damage at the end of the moratorium when we evict people and, you know, $60,000 in balances comes off. We're not going to get hit with that in that month because we've been planning for it for the last year. This is not standard accounting practice, but we had to pivot and make that decision because there's a black swan event. Okay. And then once this is over, we're going to go back to standard accounting practices. But if you don't know that kind of stuff, you can't make the right decisions for your business. And so it's really important to have someone on your team that understands how to review financial statements. I don't think relying only on your property management company to do that is the right way to do it. You know, they're the first set of eyes that sees it, but you're the second set of eyes that kind of goes through it and analyzes it and makes sure it's right as well and flows to how you want it. Every owner is a little bit different, like Gary said earlier. So some people want to see some things above the line, others want to see it below the line, and it all has to do with your business plan. And then deep dive into your financials. This is something that I just mentioned as well. Don't just trust your property management company to just provide you the financials and call it a day. You need to look into it and figure out what's going on and really pinpoint, be that second set of eyes to see if there's anything missing. We did have actually one example of a $10,000 plumbing charge for one of our properties. This was years ago. That hit our property. I didn't know what it was. I questioned it, and it was actually meant for another property. Property management companies have multiple properties. They have multiple accountants, and, you know, human error happens, and that's going to happen. And so if you're not checking those things and working with the accountant as part of your team to make sure it's right, then you could miss those things. And so if we didn't catch that $10,000 charge, it we'd be responsible for it, right? And so that's $10,000 to the bottom line that we wouldn't have had. And this is on a small 42 unit property. So that's a large number there. So you've got to understand how to read your financials. If you don't understand, Shelton has obviously done a great job with us as far as helping educate us. So ask your property management company to take you through it. But preferably have someone on your team that understands how to read financial statements and how to dig into the numbers.
All right, leasing strategy. So very important to really have a leasing strategy from the very beginning, because that's that's where your income is coming from. So you set expectations. So that, again, that's working with your property manager, working with your regional manager, and laying out what are you looking for. Some people push for 100% occupancy. We don't think that's the right way to go. Anytime we start getting close to there, we're always looking to push rents. Because we took over a property we took over end of December. They were at pretty much 100% occupied, but they had people that don't help the property. They're a little unsavory. They're just stuffing it just to get to 100%. They weren't pushing rents. I mean, they were well below. So have a strategy in place and have everyone on board. Your leasing agent, your property manager, everyone's got to be on board on what you're trying to achieve. All right, and hire right. The leasing agent is so important. They've got to be bubbly, outgoing. You can't have a person that's quiet or shy. It's just, this is a salesperson job, and so they've got to have that salesperson experience. And they've got to be super friendly. It doesn't matter, male, female, whatever it is. They've got to be outgoing. They've got to have attention to detail to follow up, because if they're not following up, that's a problem. You can go, for us, we can go in Yardi and see, track, did someone follow up on the leads, because you don't want to have tons of leads that aren't getting followed up with. And our strategy is first in, how do I say it? Last in, first out, versus when you're in a restaurant, it's the opposite. But the latest call you want to follow up with, because someone might be looking at 3-4 apartments, and if it's a few hours later, they might have already found something. So deal with the last call that you received first, and then you can work backwards. All right, verify and hold accountable. We secret shop our properties all the time. I know our property management company does that as well, but we want to make sure everything is to our liking, and we have a whole spreadsheet that we have. Did they answer every question that you asked? Did they send a follow-up email with pictures? How was that email prepared? And we've kind of tweaked and changed that email to our liking. You might get some people that might not be able to do a really good email for you, but that's fine. You can create it for them and help them, and their skills may be better on the phone or in person, but you can craft a really good email to help with the leases. And you want to track everything. You want to, we've had Neil Bawa on our asset management summit, and he talks about LASL. So it's leads. How many leads turn into appointments, that turn into showings, that turn into applications, that turn into leases. So you're tracking it all along the whole path, and you want to see where those bottlenecks are. If you have 100 leads and 2 leases, well, what happened along the way? Where was the bottleneck? Did you get enough appointments in there? Did you get enough applications? Are you getting bad leads? People that that you wouldn't rent to because of perhaps a criminal record, or they don't have 2.5 income to meet the rent. So you got to make sure everything is aligned. And also, don't be afraid to retrain. If someone's not meeting your expectations, then you can sit down with them. Maybe there's a training that you send them to, but don't be afraid just because you have someone that that is it, that you can't mold and change and help them grow. You replacing someone is very expensive, but don't hesitate if the person's not right. But obviously seek to retrain first if it's not working out. You want to be part of the plan. This is, again, real estate is a team sport. You've got to work together. You've got to celebrate the wins. And if things aren't working out, work together as a team to figure out what's not working to try to solve the problem. There might be data points that you're seeing that don't make sense, but then once you talk to your team and you figure, oh, well, this is happening and that's causing that, and then you can address it. So be a part of the plan, be a part of the solution. Some things that we're not talking about here, I mentioned earlier, is lease expirations, because you've got to start tackling that 2-3 months ahead of time. If you have when you take over a property, you might have, let's just call it like 100 units, and maybe 1 month, in a perfect scenario, there'd be about, so 100 divided by 12, you're looking about 8, in a perfect scenario, about 8 a month across the board. But sometimes you might have 15 in 1 month and 5 in another. So you want to try to smooth that out as you go forward too. So maybe you might put some people on a 9-month, maybe a 15-month lease. Not everyone necessarily has to stay on a 12-month lease. You want to have about the same amount of leases over time, and that's not going to happen, the first 6 months, but maybe the next year after that, you can kind of smooth that out as you're dealing with the month-to-months, because you want to reduce the month-to-months. You want to be proactive on the lease expectations. Any questions regarding leasing strategy?
Yeah, I have one actually. So I've been looking at smaller mid-sized properties, so it's kind of easy to list out each unit and when the lease expires, kind of like row by row. But when you start dealing with hundreds and hundreds of units, do you have a certain tool that kind of like maps out when it expires, so you can plan out, how you lease them up? Or
Yeah, it's a great question. We have an Excel report, and each month you've got the lease expirations, what they're paying, their rubs, anything else, and then you can say, let's say they're paying 700 and market rent is 900. Do you want to, if you're at like 100% occupancy and it's not too many, maybe you want to push to market rent. Maybe you want to do split the middle. You have to follow fair housing rules, but you've got to come up with a strategy that maximizes your income for that property. And that Excel report will show month to month when every lease is expiring.
And I have a quick question. I totally forgot. Remember the Neo Bawa, the LaSalle? I think it was like leads, application, showings, something leases. What was the second A?
So leads, appointments, showings, applications, and leases.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you want to convert a good amount throughout that whole line, and if the whole chain. And if you see a huge gap in between two things, that's something you want to address. If you've got tons of showings but very few apps, maybe the property isn't showing well. Is it dirty? Maybe you need a model. Maybe you have a lot of residents causing issues. I don't know. So that helps ask the right questions, and that's how you solve problems, by keep asking questions, but based on the data that you're given. All right.
All right, investor relations. So first bullet point on investor relations, Gary and I pride ourselves in being kind of the leaders in asset management and utilizing our background in operations experience to really push that. But we also pride ourselves on investor relations. This is so key when you're raising money from other people. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about being a fiduciary, but you need to communicate early and often with your investors. It's very key. If you're having an investor, invest $50, $100, $200,000, maybe even more, they have the right to know what's going on with the property. Certain investors may not want to know a lot. And to be honest, some I haven't talked to in a long time, and other ones I talk to every single month. But you have to provide the information and then allow the investor themselves to dictate how much of that information they want to consume. But you're taking their money and buying an investment in a business, and it is your responsibility to communicate to them on what is going on with the property. Okay. And so our cadence for our investors is, I would say it's pretty hands-on and intensive, but we love doing it because our goal is to build long-term relationships with our investors, not just have them invest in a deal and that's it. And so we're building a relationship with them. So, we do a monthly property update on how the property performed in the previous month. During the heat of COVID, we actually did it twice a month. And then on top of that, we do a personal phone call to them every quarter to talk to them. Some people I don't get a hold of ever, and other ones I get a hold of every time. And then we also do a quarterly webinar. And so that's 3 different ways that an investor can consume information. Some people may like reading a newsletter and that's it. They don't like to talk to people. And other people love talking to people and they don't want to read. And so we give our investors multiple ways to get the information and to ask certain questions that we may be missing. And so we always also ask for feedback from our investors on how can we improve our communication with you to make you feel comfortable about your investment. And I think Gary and I have done a really good job, and a lot of our investors trust us because of the over communication. Again, our philosophy is to over communicate. So the more you communicate, the easier it is for you and your investors, essentially, because you're giving them all the information that they need, right? Instead of hiding it or not being fully transparent, you're going to get more questions from your investors. So it's always important to just be transparent, which is my next bullet point. Don't hide things from your investors. Eventually they're going to find out, right? And so your investors would rather you be upfront with them, honest, proactive, and
Hello.
Maybe we can meet that person. Yep, perfect. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Investors would rather you be honest and upfront on your communication than tell them after the fact that something happened and you tried to fix it, but you weren't able to, right? So I don't think investors have an issue with there being a problem with a business or with their investment. There's always going to be ups and downs during an investment. And I think it's important for you to understand that. But also when you're communicating that there's an issue, you need to have a solution and a plan in place when you're presenting it to them, right? It's like anything. When I was a general manager of a golf course, I always told my employees that if they were going to come to me with a problem, they also had to come to me with a solution. Don't be part of just the problem. Try and be part of the solution as well. So when you talk to your investors and you have an issue, come with a plan in place and a solution in place, and maybe even multiple strategies on how you're going to right that wrong. And they're going to appreciate that a lot more than you just sweeping it on the rug and trying to, solve the issue without them knowing. And so our advice to you is to tackle things head on and be transparent. Okay. Next bullet point there. You are a fiduciary, act like it. And I honestly mean this. There's too many people out there that, raise capital, get deals, make money, on to the next. And you are a fiduciary to your investors' money. You're taking someone's hard-earned money and you're putting it to work for them. And the goal is to return that money as well as a return on their investment. So every decision that you're making on the property, it should not be about you and what you're going to make. You are the last in line as the sponsor. Okay. The first in line is your investors. Arguably, the first in line is your residents. We can argue that as well. We always want to make sure that our decisions are for our investors, but also positive for our residents. So we won't ever make a decision that affects the residents negatively just to make money. but those two go hand in hand with one another. Okay, so it's really important to think about the velocity of your investors' money versus the velocity of your money. So people trust you when they're investing with you. So you need to earn their trust and you need to act as a fiduciary. Okay. So, you don't sell a property because you're going to make money if your investors are not. You've always got to think about your investors first. Okay. Very important when it comes to investor relations and investing in general, in my opinion. And then last part, celebrate your success. This is just as important. Again, we're building long-term relationships, right? We don't need 1,000 investors that want to invest in our deals. We want a couple hundred close investors who we build relationships, who we know personally and can have a long-lasting relationship while we're building your wealth. So, before COVID, Gary and I used to do things like celebratory lunches where investors can come hang out with us, have a drink, chat about the property, chat with other investors, get to know one another. And, it's a more tight-knit family kind of environment. And that's what we're trying to promote. And, since COVID, we haven't been able to do that, but we also send small gifts to them after closing to thank them for their investment and to, just always stay front of mind. But it is important to celebrate the wins with not just your partners, but also your investors who essentially are your partners. And ultimately, those can really lead to referrals too. And that's a great way as an active investor to build your list. You don't necessarily need to add new people or new people you don't know, but you can add people from referrals.
Yeah, that's one of the proudest things. Our investors keep coming back, and usually they bring someone else in for the next deal, which is awesome.
Sending a nice box of chocolates is a nice touch too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, that's it for that slide.
So I have a question too again.
Yep.
So after you have your LOI accepted, and I assume you now have the property also under contract, but when do you start contacting investors with, say, that email for the soft commits? Like after due diligence, I guess at what point?
Sorry, can you say that again?
At what point do you start contacting your investors for like soft commits?
I mean, to be honest with you, as soon as possible. You don't want to wait to know how much you think you can raise until you have a deal, right? That's saying that get a deal and the money will come. It's just not true for someone that's getting into their first deal. I would say that's true for like a Grant Cardone or someone that has an established reputation or long-term experience, or a lot of investors that, that person has a track record. I think that could happen. But when you're getting into your first deal, I mean, I'll give just for myself as an example, we started building our list and getting soft commits 18 months before we actually did our first deal. Okay. Now, we didn't know we were going to have to wait 18 months. So that wasn't the original plan. But I would tell you that if we got the deal 6 months earlier, we wouldn't have been able to raise enough capital. So you should be getting soft commits on people who are interested in investing in deals like this, right? So do a sample deal package. It's a fake deal with the returns that you're looking for your investors, and go to them and say, hey, we're looking for deals in this market that look like this. This is the business plan. This is what we're going to do. And these are the returns that we're projecting on giving back. If you were presented a deal like this, would you be interested in it? If so, how much? Those are tough conversations to have, but I would encourage you to have those now and not when you have a deal. Because when you have a deal, man, Gary knows there's so much going on, right? From LOI signed to closing, it's like a whirlwind. And if you're trying to establish relationships at that point, it's far too late. So build up as many soft commits as you can today.
I guess,
But when you're in that phase already, because I think your question was if you already had an LOI, I wouldn't really start looking to, you can't really raise until you have your PPM done, but maybe you send an email saying, hey, some vague details about the deal, because in the LOI phase, you still need to go to contract phase and get through that. Mm-hmm. Then you still need to do due diligence. So there's many stop points along the way that your deal may fall apart, quite honestly. And just because you put hard money down, you've got to have the guts to walk away from that deal and not feel like, oh, I'm going to lose 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, because you've got investors, and if you screw up, you won't have any investors anymore. So you better know that this is a good deal, and you've got to do all the homework and not be afraid to walk away, even if it costs you money.
Yeah, but if you're interested in knowing who's interested, I mean, you could just schedule a webinar, right, for 3 weeks out, send out a link to your webinar, and people that are signing up for that, I mean, you have to have a relationship with them, right? But people that are signing up with that, you know that they're at least interested in seeing it. If you have one person sign up for your webinar, you know you're probably in trouble, right? But if you have 100 people, now you're probably feeling okay. So that's a good way to do it too, to gauge interest.
Yeah.
And we postponed our webinar twice for 2 different properties. So not the greatest thing to do, but we wanted to make sure everything was like a-okay on our due diligence side. And in both those cases, well, one issue was with the lender and the lending market change. Another issue was we needed to get back some information from the attorney regarding some usage. So that's why we delayed it. But and don't be afraid to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess where I was getting at was I get a lot of emails, and maybe it's just me, but anytime I see them request a soft commit, I almost always see it close like a month or 2 months down the line. But when I talk with other investors offline, they always put LOIs, they have it accepted, they're going through due diligence, and then it falls through. And it's like, it just, but I'm like, okay, so they didn't contact investors yet. So at what point do you start contacting investors? To me, it almost sounds like they go through due diligence and they're like almost about to close is when they start contacting investors. But
yeah, I mean, like Gary said, we almost had to cancel a webinar and not go forward with a deal. So sometimes you have to put the cart in front of the horse because there's so many things happening at once. But essentially the way we do it is we'll have a signed LOI. We'll try and get access to the property as soon as possible, but you'll have a signed contract. Then we go through due diligence. At that point, Gary and I know from the conversations that we're having with our vendors, with our property management company, going into every unit ourselves, whether it's a likelihood or not of moving forward with a deal, right? Because you're doing your due diligence then. Were there any huge red flags that you weren't told about, or was everything as it seemed? If everything is as it seemed, or there were only some red flags that, you know, Gary and I can avoid that hurdle or get over that hurdle, at that point is really when we're gonna plan on having the webinar and then scheduling it out. And then that's when we'll send our communication out that, hey, we are going to have a webinar. We performed due diligence. We feel comfortable about this property, and then go from there. Now, doesn't mean nothing else can pop up after due diligence, because it's happened twice to Gary and I, but you feel more comfortable about it and you have all the information, most of the information that you need to move forward. So, you know, that's how we do it, whether right or wrong. You know, that's how it's worked for us in the past, and it's done well for us.
all right, cool. Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions out there in general on multifamily or our presentation before we get into the networking?
I have a question. Lately in your webinar, you were mentioning solar as a plan, right, in your business plan. And if it's a common area that you're using solar, then I can understand. But if you're using it for the whole building, then the tenants get the benefit, right? How does that business plan work?
Yeah. So, okay, go ahead, Gary.
It's really best for a master meter property. That's really the play there. If not, then it just doesn't make sense. And we got an estimation that it'll save about 20,000 on one property per year, and so it just reduces the bill back and whatnot. But that's where it makes sense. And you can either purchase it, and it could be a huge price. It could be well over $1 million, or you can lease it back and someone else takes the tax credits and whatnot. So there's a couple of different things that you can do, but it doesn't make sense on every property and in every location. It doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yeah. Also, I would say that, you know, even though it does work for mainly master meter properties and our bill back may be less now because we're saving in electricity, that still affects the residents' all-in price, right? And so if you can lower their all-in price, you may have more room on rents or just more traffic. And the other part about this too is that you can build in additional construction or rehab. For example, at one of our properties, they're going to be paying for all of our covered parking because that's where the solar is going to be going. So we had a plan to put covered parking in the property, 135 grand. That's getting covered by the solar company. So we're going to save 135 grand on that, get covered parking, be able to charge for it. That's a huge win. On another property, they're going to replace the roofs or most of the roofs where they're putting solar. So you're getting new roofs on top of that. Now that's billed back into your total cost for the project, which increases your price per kilowatt hour slightly, but we're still 3 or 4 cents cheaper per kilowatt hour than what our regular electricity bill will be. And that 20,000 that Gary mentioned, that's already included in that.
Okay, so there are solar companies actually do roof as well.
Yeah, they'll do anything, but it is built into the total cost. So the more cost you can keep down, the lower they'll actually go on your electricity costs. But yeah, wherever the solar is going, you can actually get other things included. So like, for example, with the covered parking, we actually may be able to get some of the parking lot replaced as well, because the covered parking is gonna, need some work in the parking lot. So you could build that in as well if you wanted to.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions before networking?
Good stuff, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Cool. All right, let's network.